I've learned a lot of things doing FarScape because by my nature I don't do many things for more than a year at a time, certainly in my adult life. So I had a renewed adolescence of sorts. I learned to be patient. I learned to take risks. And I learned sort of to be a little kinder on myself. I had a lot of support from people, Anthony Simcoe and Ben Browder and Gigi, everyone really, who were the tight-knit group that was the core cast of FarScape. We were all very good to one another, and so I learned that actors can be wonderful. I mean, I've always been drawn to performers, and sometimes you do have those negative experiences where you come across someone who either doesn't take the profession seriously or they've been spoiled, and we were just blessed. So I learned to love a lot of people on FarScape, and they made it very easy. And technically, I mean, it was the most overwhelming environment to work in, and when a lot of guest actors would come on, we had to remind ourselves that it was new to them and that they were probably overwhelmed when they came on to the sets. There are the animatronic creatures like Rigel and Pilot, 6 people at Rigel's feet to make him work, to bring him into the room, to do the eyes, the ears, the voice, to then be voiced over by another actor. Green screen, practical effects on set, fireworks, bombs going off. It was crazy. So I learned to multitask a bit. And yeah, technically as an actor, I've had more time on a set of that kind than a lot of people. So it was an absolute blessing in terms of being a learning ground. I've done quite a lot of work in all the various media for actors. I started in a theatre and musical background, and started, I think, the way that I got my first theatrical agent. She heard me singing, and shortly after that she took me on. I did some commercials, and then what followed was quite a lot of work in television. Didn't do theatre for quite a while, and then when I finally did, it was Merchant of Venice, a tour through Europe. And then back again to television, and over the last few years it's been a bit of an overlap between film and television only. And this is the 3rd lead female role I've done on a television series. One was filmed in New Zealand, one was in Australia. It was my first sort of big role, my first big break, as they say. That was a nurse, Claudia Black, who was sort of very ditzy girl, very different to the character Erin that I play on FarScape, or played, I should say. And the middle one was a lawyer. So I've always played very interesting roles, but certainly over the last few years, very strong ones. And science fiction certainly seems to be the genre for strong lasses. People, when I went through periods of unemployment, would say, and I've been very fortunate, they haven't been very long, well, it is the life you've chosen for yourself, Claudia. And I say, well, far be it from me to compare myself with someone like Mozart or Beethoven, but I think when you are an artist, I don't think you wake up one morning and say, okay, got to decide today, am I going to build houses or am I going to be a composer? I think there's something innately in you that you need to express. And I think that was very clear to my kindergarten teacher, who cast me in my first lead role. And I did a lot of amateur productions through school, and some semi-professional ones with a brother school of ours that had, it was a very exclusive boys' school, so we were very fortunate to be involved with them. And that's pretty much how I learned to sing and act, treading the boards there at a school. And my parents had a heart attack when I told them that I wanted to pursue it professionally, but they were supportive at the same time. They just knew that it was a very difficult field to get into and to succeed in, but I think they're very proud now, especially with FarScape, because it's something that their friends have seen as well on television. So it's always been something I've wanted to do. I've always loved the music as well, and I can't do anything else. I'm a terrible waitress, so it was acting or nothing. Whatever I do, I suppose the ethos that I've been brought up with, or what I've carried with me, is the fact that whatever I do, I just want to do it the best that I can. But I've been cursed by being a lazy perfectionist, which is a terrible combination. So I chose the acting because I knew it was something that I couldn't afford to waste other people's time as an actor, so I had to be very diligent. So it's taught me an incredible amount of discipline. And while I'm trying to take everyone else seriously, I'm trying to take myself a little less seriously in the process. FarScape was, we were in a rare situation filming FarScape because we were on the other side of the world, primarily making it for the Sci-Fi Channel and for the BBC and other European territories. And I think because of Australians by nature, we had a tone of irreverence that was threaded through the whole series, which we may not have had elsewhere. And also we were blessed because the Sci-Fi Channel gave us a lot of rope, really. They wanted it to be sassy, they wanted it to be intelligent and sexy and original, and we rose to it, really. And it's now great talking to directors who say that we've changed them and the way that they work, because they're now expecting actors in auditions to come up with suggestions and to have ideas. And a lot of actors in Australia expect to be mollycoddled and to be looked after and have the director give them a lot of attention. And what we learnt on FarScape was to make informed and hopefully intelligent choices on our own and self-direct in a way, because they had so many other elements to take care of while they were directing, which directors often don't have to deal with. But with CGI and the animatronics and all those sorts of things, we were really fortunate that as actors we were able to make a lot of decisions on our own. But also when we did make suggestions, and the directors would embrace them. And David Kemper pretty much sets the tone of the show as well in that regard. And Ben took over when he was on set, Ben would run the set in a way that was highly collaborative, and it helps when the actors are intelligent. To have a lead actor like Ben, who's generous and bright, makes for a really productive working environment, so we were very lucky. Poor Erin has gone through so much on this show, and it was part of the appeal of taking the role in the first place. I just felt that she had an incredible arc, potentially. And that was probably realised in season 3, which was the hardest year for Erin emotionally, and for me as an actor, an incredible opportunity. So in that season, Erin, I'm trying to remember how we start season 3, but she chooses to go over to Talon with one of the Crichtons who's been cloned, falls in love with him, meets her mother, who is chasing after her, has to walk away from her mother's assassination because she knows that her mother has to be killed, only to find after John has died, the love of her life, practically in her arms, that her mother is still alive. So I'd say in the choice, Erin goes through such an incredible myriad of emotions, but seemingly is so numb that she can't even take on the magnitude of it. And so I suppose finally in season 3, yielding and allowing herself to fall in love, having him die, meeting her mum, it not going terribly well, then dropping her mum off the side of a building after she accidentally gets shot by Crace, and then having to reunite with the other John. I'd say those things were the most major parts of her development, and they all happened in season 3. Apart from meeting him in the first place and no longer being able to be a peacekeeper, that's probably the other milestone. You want to be taking risks. That's when you really fly as an artist or as a creator of something, and as filmmakers. So we always had to sort of simplify our choices on those occasions, because for self-preservation, but mostly for the sake of the story, because that's all you have. So you have to simplify your choices, which at other times I may have taken greater risks as an actor. For example, the episode that Ben wrote in season 4, the episode where I played the blonde princess. I could take risks there because it was a comedy piece, which had to be layered with something a bit more subversive and sinister. But at the same time, I could basically do whatever I wanted because I was playing a new character completely from scratch. And Tony and Ben just said, okay, do the scenes as they're written, and then once we get into the fight scene, just go crazy and improvise. And that was probably the largest sort of bulk of improvisation that I've experienced doing on the show. Ben improvised a fair bit with sort of cultural references, and that was often a timely matter, because if something had just happened in the news, he would reference it that day in the script on the set as it happened. So we would improvise in those ways. Ben and I made a decision that we wanted to pull out and expand on as many romantic elements of the storytelling on FarScape as possible. So one of the episodes that he wrote, Green-Eyed Monster, is an example. He chose to do the story primarily about Aaron in the center of in the corner of the triangle, the love triangle. So there were a lot of elements that used to come into the storytelling about love triangles, sometimes unrequited love. That was a major theme with Grace and Aaron. The man who sort of basically deems her irreversibly contaminated witnesses in the flashback of the way we weren't, as we learn that she'd basically, we say dobbed in Australia. That means turned in, or what's another expression for dobbed in? Basically ratted on her lover to get promoted. Back to Prowler detail. So Erin learnt the hard way about love in that situation. She was frightened of it. So when she meets Crichton, she has a lot to learn about what it can do and how it can change her life. And then when he dies, it almost destroys her, and she goes back to being what she knows, which is a cold, hard peacekeeper, because it's the way they've always been trained. So it's a really interesting, thematically, the concept of love in the story is fascinating, because it's about a woman who's been told she's not allowed to. And then despite herself and despite everything, she cannot help but fall for this man who softens her and teaches her how to actually love properly, if there is a proper way to love. And then, you know, the themes with Dargo and Shiana and everything comes at a cost. That's the other thing about love on FarScape. There's always a price to pay, and you always have to make a choice between one person or another, and you choose one person and the other person will die, or they'll be heartbroken, or there'll be some intergalactical disaster of, you know, the proportions and the scales were always huge on the show. So, yeah, love was always at the center of a very dynamic story. The decision to clone Crichton was a brilliant one, because it meant the producers and the audience, in a way, could have their cake and eat it too. The cake for the audience was to see, finally, Crichton and Aaron together. Eating it too, from the producer's perspective, was that they could then separate us again in quite a substantial way and reset the clock, because each season it followed a pretty, you know, repetitive shape. Girl meets boy, they like each other, they can't be together, they finally get a chance to be together and something pulls them apart, and each season this would happen in new ways, and we were constantly looking for new ways, and death was certainly a bit of a way to separate them for a while. One thing that David Kemper said at the beginning of the show was he didn't want us to be, the aliens in the FarScape world, to be so superhuman that things didn't hurt, emotionally and physically. If you got hit, you had to get some kind of bruise or a scar or blood somewhere. If you got shot, it was supposed to hurt instead of, you know, unlike the Scarans, who became almost unbeatable. And that's to do with the stakes and the consequences in the universe, and I think it gives it a more human and realistic element. And Crichton's death, so when people do die, often in science fiction, obviously, it's a thing, you know, it's a part of the nature of the genre. People can be exhumed, they can come back. There's wonderful things that happen out in that crazy alien universe that can make people spring to life again. But at the center of that, the Crichton that Aaron falls in love with will never come back. He's a man that she fell completely in love with, and although she likes the other Crichton because they really are the same person, she hasn't shared that same level of development with him. So she has to sort of get to know him all over again, and concede again to love after losing both her mother twice, or 3 times in her life, but twice in season 3, and Crichton. Zan dying, that came at a huge price for Aaron, because Zan had made the choice to give up her life for Aaron and for Aaron and John, and it goes against everything that Aaron's been trained to believe in. She has to sort of keep a distance from people because they get hurt if you're not concentrating on the task at hand. So death was always, in our universe, was always something that had to matter and it had to count. Otherwise, the characters stood for nothing, and we would cease to care about them and what happened to them. FarScape is also meant to me creatively that the sky's the limit, that I should just keep aiming for more and better, and, you know, to go harder, to go hard with my work, to take greater risks, to trust people. I've met the continuity of working with some of the same directors and actors has meant that it's been easier to trust other people with my work as well, and that is a big lesson for actors because it's disempowering, really. You do the work and it's out of your hands once it's in the can. It's somebody else's work. So we were very well looked after. So FarScape's been an incredible opportunity. The best character, I think, in a long time to play. And a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. And yeah, an experience of a lifetime. One thing that David Kemper said at the beginning of the show was he didn't want us to be, the aliens in the FarScape world, to be so superhuman that things didn't hurt, emotionally and physically. If you got hit, you had to get some kind of bruise or a scar or blood somewhere. And that's to do with the stakes and the consequences in the universe, and I think it gives it a more human and realistic element.
He took some of Pilot's DNA, and he...
How did...
I went back there. I wanted him to find me a place where I could belong. I didn't want to get left behind. I'm so scared.
So when people do die, often in science fiction, obviously, it's a thing, you know, it's a part of the nature of the genre. People can be exhumed, they can come back. There's wonderful things that happen out in that crazy alien universe that can make people spring to life again. But at the center of that, the Crichton that Erin falls in love with will never come back. He's a man that she fell completely in love with, and although she likes the other Crichton because they really are the same person, she hasn't shared that same level of development with him. So she has to sort of get to know him all over again. And concede again to love after losing both her mother twice, or 3 times in her life, but twice in season 3, and Crichton. Zan dying, that came at a huge price for Erin because Zan had made the choice to give up her life for Erin and for Erin and John. And it goes against everything that Erin's been trained to believe in. She has to sort of keep a distance from people because they get hurt. Death was always, in our universe, was always something that had to matter and it had to count. Otherwise, the characters stood for nothing and we would cease to care about them and what happened to them. I am reminded at this point of a word that you actually brought to this vessel. Hope.
I would be lost without you.
Then you'll never be lost.
No matter what happened, you have worked your way into my heart.
You've shown me that I am one.
I love you.
I love you too.
You are so my girl.
It's difficult in science fiction to improvise as an actor, and I think the writers at first had chosen the show to work on specifically because their work would end up intact. Not so on FarScape. There were too many things that changed. We were shooting basically the impossible. We had an incredibly difficult schedule. FarScape could not have been made at all in another country. Australia is famous for its fast turnaround television. It's not necessarily very good, but we're famous for it, and we do it. The crew particularly, not necessarily actors, but the crew do it very well, and the actors who are proficient are excellent technicians. It's difficult to get good work out there as an actor when you're shooting quickly, or for anyone for that matter. The director of photography, everything's always compromised because of time. So considering the quality that we got in the end, it was miraculous. And because of that, because things were always at such a fast pace, the sets were being turned around in overtime by a lot of people working too hard, things would have to be changed on the day from the script that had been written maybe or devised a month or two beforehand. So we were sometimes in a position where the director would have to change something, or we would call the people down from the writing department and make sure that they could make the adjustments for us. Some days we hadn't been delivered an entire script, so we would just be given pages and it would develop from there, which becomes incredibly difficult for everyone involved because you want to be taking risks. That's when you really fly as an artist or as a creator of something, and as filmmakers. So we always had to sort of simplify our choices on those occasions, because for self-preservation, but mostly for the sake of the story, because that's all you have. So you have to simplify your choices, which at other times I may have taken greater risks as an actor. For example, the episode that Ben wrote in season 4, the episode where I played the blonde princess. I could take risks there because it was a comedy piece, which had to be layered with something a bit more subversive and sinister. But at the same time, I could basically do whatever I wanted because I was playing a new character completely from scratch.
So can I help you find some place to see that sword?
And Tony and Ben just said, okay, do the scenes as they're written, and then once we get into the fight scene, just go crazy and improvise. And that was probably the largest sort of bulk of improvisation that I've experienced doing on the show. Ben improvised a fair bit with sort of cultural references, and that was often a timely matter because if something had just happened in the news, he would reference it that day in the script on the set as it happened. So we would improvise in those ways.
Oh, wow. Wait.
What?
Orris fruit.
Remind me not to put that on my Cocoa Pops.
Aaron is the most physical part I've ever had to play, and I totally made it up as I went along because I was the nerd at school that was totally uncoordinated, still am quite uncoordinated, have a very fast metabolism, so I've never, until now, touch wood, had to diet. I have a very healthy appetite, actually. All the crew used to sort of comment on how much food I used to pile on my plate. So I've done a few things here and there when I've actually had an injury from a fight scene, because I'm not trained in martial arts, in case no one had worked that out, because I admire all the women on TV shows who have had, you know, training, because they look incredible. I'd always be taught how to do something a couple of minutes before we did the scene, and I always felt so unconfident about it. So if I had my time again, I'd love to do the training. I was always supposed to train properly with some guys from our special forces, and we could never get it together because FarScape took over our lives in ways that we just could not have imagined. It was bigger than anyone could have expected. And the production office were in the midst of arranging the training, and I was still filming Pitch Black, so I didn't have a chance in hell of doing any sort of physical training before it. And in the breaks, we were always going off on publicity tours. So I just used to say a little prayer, and Dad rang me one night and said, I watched another episode tonight. You had a bit of a limp wrist when you were doing your punches. Thanks, Dad, I remember that. Physically, it was the most draining project I've ever worked on. We didn't work in conditions that were fantastic, I have to say. We weren't in purpose-built studios. We had no proper air conditioning. They did the best that they could. We had sort of Robbie the Robot portable units, which we would attach big tubes to and try and pump cold air into the sets. There were some days where I knew I would not make it through the day unless I was horizontal for about 5 or 10 minutes. So I'd just throw down my lunch and then just have a lie down because it was so exhausting.
What are you doing in here anyway?
Oh, I just wanted to, be there.
Thank you.
Don't mention it.
Why would I ever mention it?
How Australian is FarScape? Well, the speech that David Kemper made at the end of season 4, at the end of the final scene that was ever filmed, he said this is a show made in Australia primarily by Australians. But as everything with the show, it was a collaboration. I always got the sense that the team from England who came out for from the Jim Henson's Creature Shop, and poor David and Ben, who for a long time were the only two Americans on the show or on set permanently. And obviously all the Australians who were involved. I don't think it's a numbers game. I just think it was a co-production technically as well. So I suppose individually everyone could answer how Australian is Aaron, how Australian is Dargo, how Australian is Zan. Crichton's 100% prime beef American, that's for sure. Ben Browder, however, is now talking a bit like an Aussie. And so are his kids. So he's brought a lot of Australia into his heart personally, but I think Crichton, there was never any doubt where Crichton came from. Erin, well, she's sort of a universal chick, a bit like me, travelled around a bit, got a voice that sounds like it's a bit of everywhere. And the show itself, it just belongs to everyone who made it. I don't think it belongs necessarily to Australia.
You once said it was as if the fates meant for us to be together.
And I believe that.
Well, then if it's true, we will be together again.
FarScape has meant to me family more than anything, and has been reinforced by going to conventions and meeting people who have a mutual love of the show and an enthusiasm for us as well as performers. I remember the first long-term television role that I did, lead role I did, I was so sad when it finished, even though it didn't go for that long, not nearly as long as FarScape, because I would have to say goodbye to these people, and I knew I would never see them that way again, in the room together, ever again, maybe. And I got very attached to people, and when you work on something like FarScape for 4 years, some people come and go. We did a photo where it was just the people who'd been there from the very first day, and there weren't many left, I have to say. There were about maybe 10 maximum from the crew and the actors, and I've carried all of them with me. You know, we try to keep in contact, but we'll never be together as a group again. So while it lasted, it was definitely about our funny, dysfunctional, crazy, collaborative family. And after being in New York on September the 11th last year, I've been told by a lot of the fans that they consider me part of their group, because Ben and I, and Ben as well, we experienced this incredible event in our lives in this city. And I felt terrible that a lot of these people had travelled interstate or from other countries to be in New York because of us, because of the show. And I'm so glad that they returned this year safe and sound. So it's been an amazing experience. I didn't expect to get so emotionally connected to people. And they've just been so warm and generous. So. And FarScape has also meant to me creatively that the sky's the limit, that I should just keep aiming for more and better, and you know, to go harder, to go hard with my work, to take greater risks, to trust people. I've met the continuity of working with some of the same directors and actors has meant that it's been easier to trust other people with my work as well, and that is a big lesson for actors, because it's disempowering, really. You do the work and it's out of your hands once it's in the can. It's somebody else's work. So we were very well looked after. So FarScape's been an incredible opportunity. The best character, I think, in a long time to play. And a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. And yeah, an experience of a lifetime.
Let me show you something. Come here. I'm not gonna buy it. This is a star chart. These are the names I give the stars.
I've already got names.
Yeah, I know, but Mantaka 3 sounds boring to me anyway. It's Huey, Louie, Dewey. You see that one? That's that star right there. The bright one. It's my point of reference. My guide. And it always becomes the center of my chart. I always name it Aaron.
You say it's your guide.
It's my one constant. Would you like to name some stars?
There's a lot of them.
Then we could take our time.